He's saying they need to step down and let more courageous people speak up. How about you shut the fuck up and let the Ukrainians speak? Anyway, moving on. Let's talk about this post from Ian Miles Wrong. It's about 11 peace activists, quote unquote. These are people from Code Pink, which is a quote unquote peace organization. We'll talk about it in a moment. Who went up to Bernie Sanders' office and protested against him because he supports aid to Ukraine. And then those people got arrested because they were outside of his office, like yelling and shouting, and you know, the cops eventually, the Capitol Police was like, you can't do that, and then they were arrested and they were taken out, which is, you know, how, yeah, to be expected. I mean, the people went there to get arrested, and this is what I really don't like about this tweet. Bernie Sanders has 11 people arrested for protesting at his office to call for peace in Ukraine instead of escalating the conflict. Not even McCarthy had protesters who showed up at his office arrested. This is what Democrats really are. Authoritarians. Wow. Very, very brave and stunning statement. Let's see.
Vermonters want peace.
Do you have any comment?
I'm from Vermont, and I voted for Bernie every time from Congress on. I wasn't there when he was mayor, but I worked for him and his campaign. I believed in him, and he has crushed all my hopes for some kind of sanity within this building.
He recently tweeted out that he wants to see more funding go to Ukraine.
Okay, so this is like a whole setup. Like this isn't like a this is like a setup. The idea is, and I've traveled a little bit in these circles, so I can tell you how this works. What they'll do at these events is they'll have a bunch of people go to either like the Capitol House, or they'll have it at a rally, and they'll have one person start yelling, and then that person will get arrested and dragged away, and they'll have somebody, usually some freelance journalist that's sympathetic to their ideas, will then interview them as they're being carried away to paint them as if, you know, look at this poor, innocent person who could do no wrong, being persecuted due to their beautiful beliefs, right? And then once that person has moved out, then the next person starts creating a lot of noise, and so they drag out as long as possible depending on how many people they have.
Days ago, can I get your reaction to that?
I'm horrified. I'm horrified. I watched the carnage going on over there, and
I watched the carnage going on the television from my living room with my morning coffee, and I decided that those people getting murdered really need to put down their guns and get murdered unarmed.
how can anyone say this is good? Cluster bombs. We're on the brink of nuclear war.
The brink of nuclear war. I mean, okay. It doesn't feel like the brink of nuclear war. Is it the brink of nuclear war because like a Russian state TV host said it was the brink of nuclear war? Or is it the brink of nuclear war because the Russian government said that we reserve the right to use nukes if our territorial sovereignty is threatened, which has been the long-standing position of the Russian government ever since the collapse of the Soviet Union? What makes it the brink of nuclear war? Is it because it's a conflict between two nuclear powers? Is that it? Because that's happened dozens of times during the Cold War and since. So like when you say it's the brink of nuclear war, right, and you're not trying to be hyperbolic, I would expect something to back that up. But all that has really happened around nuclear war is, number one, during the Trump administration pulling out of different arms control treaties, which I think is a real concern. That's a real concern. I agree with that. But that's not what's being talked about here. The other real thing that's happened is rhetoric, and that's it. So I don't think people should be saying this hyperbolic nonsense outside of the senator's office.
How can he not? All the things he says, how can he not?
Why are they arresting you?
Thank you.
For holding up a sign, a quote from Bernie Sanders calling for dialogue. And in Bernie Sanders' office, they seem to suggest that war is solidarity, which is madness, how they're co-opting the language of peace and liberation to lead us to World War III. It's crazy.
Okay, I have a new term for these types of people. I'm going to call them the flower child left. Okay? I don't know what else to refer to them as. I told my buddy I was going to call them the flower child left moving forward. He didn't want me to, because he likes the term flower child, but that's all I can call them now. The flower child left. It's not solidarity to send weapons and guns. Yes, it is. What is this pussy shit? When did our left become such pansies? Where's Nestor Ivanovich Makhno? What do you think? I remember that Malcolm X quote. Black people, put down your guns. The white man will give us our freedom. Remember that Malcolm X quote? No, I don't remember that Malcolm X quote. Because that's stupid. Ukraine is being invaded for the second time in 8 years. This time with the explicit intent of eradicating the Ukrainian national identity and eradicating the Ukrainian state if it does not subserve itself to Russian interests, whether that be its want to control Ukrainian natural gas, or whether it be its want to control its bountiful grain production and wheat production through its fields. They are wanting to conquer Ukraine and erase its culture and then colonize it with settlers. They're doing it right now in Mariupol. They're doing it right now in Mariupol. Putin's already signed executive orders that he can use to deport anyone who does not give him passport photos, fingerprints, and takes a Russian passport. At any point, they could take you, take your property rights are stripped, and you're deported. And that's if you're lucky. That's if you don't end up in one of the mass graves, like the one in Izium, where over 440 bodies were found. This is not the first week of the war. Before all the atrocities, before we saw the full extent of what Russia's goals were. Yes, you can show solidarity by sending people weapons to defend themselves. We should have sent more solidarity, for example, to the Poles when they were fighting off the Nazi invasion before they were then fighting off the Soviet invasion. We should have sent more solidarity to the Finns when they were fighting off the Soviet invasion. We did send solidarity to the British and weapons and means to try to fight back against the Nazis. We didn't do enough, but we did send some. You can express solidarity in a lot of different ways, but the idea that solidarity only exists through hugs and kisses and pats on the head, this is flower child hippie bullshit. Look, the hippie movement had some positive aspects to it, okay? LSD is cool and everything, right? But I feel like the hippie left, especially the older, like 60, 70-year-old hippie left that I'm meeting at rallies like this, their brain has been melted by the Vietnam War. They can't imagine another war that happens that actually is worth fighting. I would like anybody to sit these people down and ask them if there's a war worth fighting. At a certain point, you have to defend yourself. At one point, after a robber has broken into your home and stolen your children, raped your wife, murdered your family, looted your property, at one point, would it be moral to give that man a gun to shoot the fucker? I think that would be moral. At a certain point, you got to stand up for yourself. Thank you for the Prime Maniac. Appreciate it. Look, I'm not saying all the solutions to all the problems of the world is war. We shouldn't have been selling weapons to the Saudis to bomb Yemen, for example. The war in Vietnam was a massive, massive tragedy, and we shouldn't have intervened on behalf of the French colonialists. We can go to any number of conflicts in history where I can come here and get on my knees and say, as an American, I'm very, very sorry. But you're not going to make me say that the people getting their countrymen dumped in mass graves with the explicit intent of the invader to eradicate their national identity as they kidnap their children. There's an open ICC, International Criminal Court, warrant out for Putin for his arrest for that very issue. You're not going to make me say that the only solution to that is peace, love, happiness, kisses, and fairy dust. This is nonsense.
They're so out of touch, not just with the American people, but with...
Okay, out of touch with the American people. The majority of Americans still support aid to Ukraine. I think these people just don't know how to deal with it when, they're actually in the minority. I think that they've gotten into the rhythm of talking about Afghanistan and Iraq for over 20 years, and now that it's a different war, they don't know how to change their thinking or change their talking.
With the entire world. Mm-hmm. This guy is supposed to be the progressive hero.
Yeah, what do we need Bernie to do?
We really just need him to step aside and leave room for other people who are actually going to fight for us, who are going to fight for peace. Because he obviously isn't courageous enough to fight for peace.
Peace.
It's very courageous to say that you should give in to the invader and do nothing. We should show great courage, America, by doing nothing in the face of ethnic cleansing. Wow, that's very brave and stunning. Look, it'd be one thing if they went in there and said, look, I don't give a fuck about these foreigners, okay? They're foreigners, not Americans. We should only care about Americans. USA, USA. Like, I don't agree with that sentiment, but at least I understand that sentiment. People like that have existed in the United States since its inception, right? But this idea that what they're doing is on behalf of the Ukrainian people, nobody that did this protest was Ukrainian. Nobody in there is from Luhansk or Donetsk or Kiev or Zaporozhye or Dnipro or Hulepole or none of these people are from there. None of these people speak Ukrainian. None of these people speak Russian. They have no fucking clue. Okay? Most of these people probably only found out about the war like a year and a half ago. So, but I don't like this type of I am here to save the Ukrainians, as Ukrainians are yelling from the rooftops, please give us the means to defend ourselves. It's so frustrating. Stop speaking. He's saying they need to step down and let more courageous people speak up. How about you shut the fuck up and let the Ukrainians speak? Anyway, moving on from this, I want to talk about Code Pink, and I want to talk about the wider problem with the flower child left. And that's the only thing I can call these people. The flower child left, who are getting the praise of people like Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene, the same person who a week ago said that the Ukrainians are kidnapping babies and are harvesting their organs to use in the trafficking trade, which is complete nonsense, complete bullshit. Isn't happening. The type of stuff you would expect to be reading in the Elders of Zion, not from a sitting Republican congressperson, but she had something to say about these Code Pink activists. Today I met brave Code Pink activists who protested for peace in Bernie Sanders' office. What did they do that was brave? Is standing like in front of a door and yelling brave? What was the brave thing that they did? What's their bravery? Was their bravery spitballing about a war they don't know about from thousands of miles away? Is it brave to say America should do nothing? What's the bravery? And well, let's talk about the flower child left, because I want to talk about Code Pink. Code Pink is an organization, they call itself a feminist organization. It's an organization specifically around ending war. That's it. That's their one purpose, is to end war. Now, I don't think ending war is bad. I think war is terrible. War, as an extension of politics, should be avoided if possible, as long as you're not giving up your things like, for example, your freedom, your rights. Certain things are worth fighting for, right? You know, freedom isn't free is the phrase, and even though it's corny and overused, it is true that these things come at a price, even if that price is not necessarily fighting the war, but at least being willing to fight the war. So those who would tread upon your freedom know that you would be willing to defend yourself. Often, that is enough to defend yourself. But Code Pink doesn't get into any of that nuance. Code Pink, anytime America takes any stance in any conflict around the world where we possibly will send anyone weapons ever, they're going to take the opposite position. That is what they do every single time. And the war in Ukraine is another example of that. That's not to say that they weren't right about Yemen, or that they weren't right about any of the other conflicts where we were sending weapons to, but they were right more because of not that they came to a conclusion based upon looking at all the facts and looking at all the data. They're like, okay, look, this is the best solution to the war. They just took a position against all wars. And most of the batting average they've hit well, because America's been engaged in pretty bad wars in the 21st century. Like, for example, the invasion of Iraq or our disastrous occupation of Afghanistan. And because they've had a generally decent batting average on these wars, not because they're particularly intelligent or they had a good analysis of these wars, but just because they got lucky, if I'm being honest with you. Now they've decided to try to repeat this strategy in a war that is completely different than Iraq and completely different from Afghanistan, because the geopolitics are different, the history of different, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years of Ukrainian history, culminating. Whether we talk about the Russian imperialism, the Tsardom, the Soviet Union, all these different points of history leading to what we see today. Of course it's different than Iraq. Of course it's different from Afghanistan. People sometimes look at me and they say, you think this is different than Afghanistan and Iraq? Yes! All wars are different. Some are worth fighting, some are not worth fighting. The idea that, like, after World War II, all war became futile and there was never again a struggle worth struggling for, whether it be Algerian independence or whether it be the independence of the Vietnamese or any number of people. There are wars worth fighting. And this is one of them. But Code Pink doesn't want to get into the details of why this war is fighting. It's just a war. And so they say people died in war and that's bad. So therefore end the war. Are they going to get into how to end the war? What should be agreed to? If we should sign away the homes and families of millions of people to occupation? I meet the people. One of my good friends. Oh, you know what? I won't even make it like a vague people. I know somebody by the name of Bogdan. Good friend of mine. Fixer. Helped me a lot. He's invited me to church. I'm going to be going to his church this Saturday. He's a very nice guy. He got to see his city for the first time in 9 years after being displaced from a refugee. Not from inside its walls, but from a distance. He saw a few houses from a distance, the city of Donetsk, while we were doing coverage of the artillery crews in Zaporozhye and Donetsk. And the dude was almost moved to tears. Being able to see his old home. Being able to think of that dream of being able to return to the place he was forced from. When you talk to him, do you think it's worth fighting for him? If you talk to any of the other people displaced from Donetsk or Mariupol or Mediopol or any of these places, that it's worth fighting for their homes or worth fighting for their families who are stranded there, who can't leave? Do you know how much it costs to leave occupied territory for the ones who are trapped there? It can cost upwards of $3,000 to $5,000. $3,000 to $5,000. That's when the local economy is hollowed out. The unemployment rate in occupied territory, I hear estimates of 20 to 30, sometimes 40%. Of course, the Russian government is not releasing figures on this type of stuff or particularly accurate information on that type of stuff because they don't want to make their occupation look incompetent and economically disastrous. How do you scrounge around that type of money? A lot of people go online and beg their family for it. But a lot of those elderly people, a lot of those people who don't have wealthy family members, a lot of those people who are working 9 to 5 jobs that is not letting them roll in it, $3,000 to $5,000 is a lot of money for people in this part of the world. You're making $3,000 to $5,000 a month in Ukraine, and you're definitely one of the wealthier people in this country, upper middle class to upper class. That's not the status of the people in occupied territory. Their liberation is not worth fighting for. Would we apply this standard to any other anti-colonial struggle? The Algerians. What about Angola? When they were fighting against Portuguese colonialism, the Congo. Anyway, my disagreements with Code Pink's flower child activism aside, they hosted an event recently. And that event had a bunch of people on, like Lee Camp and others, Lee Camp, Dr. Cornell West, and other speakers, to talk about why we need to stop sending aid to Ukraine. And we need to tell the Ukrainians that they have to negotiate a peace plan right away, basically force them to do it. And did they talk about the details of what that peace plan would look like to prioritize the needs and wants of local? No, just vaguely peace and give peace a chance. Just, again, hippie bullshit. I do want to say a few things about this event. It's a long, like over hour-long event, and I don't really want to watch it with you guys because I don't want to get a brain aneurysm. My ears are already ringing from the shelling from coming back from the east right now. So, you know, I don't need to give myself any more medical problems. But the first thing I want to comment on is their guests for this speaking event. Did anybody in chat want to guess how many Ukrainians spoke at this event about peace in Ukraine? Because when there's events on peace in Palestine, they get Palestinians. When there's events on peace in other areas, they get people from those countries. Want to know how many there were? 0. There were 0. In fact, I'd go as far to say there was -2. You want to know why there was -2? Because instead of having Ukrainians on, they had 2 former Russian state media employees on, like Lee Camp, who worked for Russia Today. So not only did they not have Ukrainian voices on to talk about their struggle, probably because if they were, they would disagree with them, and they would go up to them and start wagging the finger in the face of Ukrainians, saying, "You don't know anything about the war, Mr. Ukrainian. Let me tell you about your country as an American," with this very American-centrist outlook, very American-centric outlook. Instead, they had 2 former Russian state media hosts. There is a nation invading Ukraine, doing it for blood and soil reasons, to save the quote-unquote ethnic Russians, whatever the fuck that means. They're invading to quote-unquote save those people by bombing them and wiping them off the face of the earth, wiping city off after city off the planet, while openly stating their goal of wiping Ukraine as a national entity off the face of the earth if it does not subserve itself to Russian interests. Putin said that on the first day of the invasion. And instead of bringing on people that could represent the voices of those displaced, murdered, raped, and dumped in mass graves, they decide to bring on voices for those who worked for the murderers, the rapists, and the genociders. Personally, I disagree with that. I don't like that. I think that's bad. And I think that's bad activism. Let me show you a clip from this event. This is Lee Camp, former Russian state media host, talking about all the things that they could have done with the money that we've given to Ukraine.
Around $130 billion of aid has been sent or approved for this proxy war in Ukraine. According to the Department of Housing and Urban Development, it would cost $20 billion to end homelessness in the United States. We could end homelessness 6 times over for the current price tag of this proxy war. According to the UN World Food Program, it would cost $40 billion to end world hunger. We could have ended world hunger 3 times over for the amount we've spent on this insanity. We could have given everyone in the world, the whole world, the food they need, and then thrown in some flapjacks and grits on top for the fuck of it. We could have done that and still had money left over. And our military is supposed to bring security to the U.S., right? That's their goal, right? The military brings security. Well, my God, ending world hunger would absolutely bring security to the United States.
Okay, so first off, this is the nitpicky thing. It's not nitpicky, but when he says such knuckle-dragging, window-licking nonsense, mouth-breathing, dingbat nonsense, I do want to just start with the littlest among these things. When you call it a proxy war that is often used to rob the Ukrainians of their autonomy and the fact that they want to fight for their own liberation, just like any other people of any other country, just like the Chinese wanted to fight for their liberation, just like the Vietnamese did, just like the Algerians and all these other people did. Okay, putting that aside, $20 billion would not end homelessness in the United States. The numbers he said, number one, on its face, you should have heard that number and immediately called bullshit. Because that's an amazingly low price tag to end homelessness in the United States. He cites the Department of Housing and Urban Development in order to give this claim more credibility, but the numbers he's citing are from 2012. He specifically went out of his way to find old numbers. The number now is 30 billion, and the numbers we're talking about is just housing vouchers. So even if we spent 50% more than what he's talking about right now on the housing vouchers, not only would that still not end homelessness, you would have to spend that amount of money annually. So not only is it not 20 billion, it's 30 billion. You would have to spend that money annually every year, not one aid package here, one aid package there, but every single year continuously. And that still wouldn't end homelessness. That'd be a good first step. I'm not saying we shouldn't do it, but I am saying that, number one, he's lying about the numbers. He's using out-of-date numbers when there's more in-date numbers that he could have used, and he's using those out-of-date numbers to try to make his case better. That's deceptive. And not only are the numbers wrong, but you'd have to spend that annually, information he's not including. He's also not talking about the money that would need to be spent in investing into affordable housing, into public housing, into rehabilitation programs. Because if you're going to have people in, for example, homeless shelters, it's going to be hard to be housing a family of 4, a wife, a husband, and 2 kids that are down on hard times with a crack addict that has a history of violence. Not to say that all crack addicts are like that. I don't want to stereotype crack addicts, okay? Crack addicts unite or whatever. But obviously, having those 2 people housed in the same unit could become an issue. And rehabilitation is going to be very important. So he's trying to simplify this problem to be like, we could have solved all the world's problems, but instead Ukraine had to stick its tiny little nose out and get invaded by Russia. Terrible, terrible, terrible. Bullshit. The same thing is wrong about his statement that we could end world hunger for 40 billion. Again, all that would be doing is putting food into the hands of people. You'd have to spend that annually. That's not talking about investments in agricultural development or in the local economies. Also, if we were to just go out and hand out food to people and end hunger, what type of damage would that do to local farmers? It's not that simple. You need to support the local economies to make them sustainable. You need to support them with jobs so people can feed their own families. I'm not saying that it's never good to give someone a handout when they need it. But I'm saying that it's not as simple as just giving everybody free stuff and not investing in the infrastructure that's necessary to keep these communities sustainable, especially as climate change is worsening. And there's going to be a lot of arable land that is going to become unarable land because of climate change. And we're going to face water crises that are going to intensify these problems and make it only more difficult to fix and more difficult to solve. And it's going to take larger investments. They want to pretend that it was either solve all the world's problems or save Ukraine. Number one, it's a false dilemma. But number two, even if we spent every single dollar we have sent to Ukraine on these programs, that would not solve these issues permanently. Also, I'm not even talking about the elephant in the room for anybody who's been paying attention to the aid or has been studying the debate on aid. A lot of the stuff we're sending is not food. It's weapons that were made 30, 40 years ago. I am not going to be part of the aid program bringing cluster bombs to Sudanese children to eat. I don't think they want them, okay? Maybe the rapid support forces would like those cluster bombs. Maybe the Sudanese military would like those cluster bombs. But that is not going to feed Sudanese children. And you cannot just melt down Abrams tanks and turn it into money. And a lot of these equipment, definitely the old Vietnam era troop carriers, even if you were to sell them, you would not be selling them for particularly that much cash. The amount of money we're accounting for when we're talking about total amount of aid, we're talking about how much it cost when we originally made these things. Even though these old troop carriers, we were never going to use in an American war, period. And the amount of value that they had has degraded, obviously, over 40, 50 years. So not only is his numbers deceitful, not only is his numbers outdated, not only are his numbers just flat out wrong and simplifying an issue that, not even simplifying. Simplifying makes it sound like he's taking all the numbers and just trying to make it simple for people to hear. He's being deceptive about it, but he's trying to just craft a simple narrative for people to consume. That's why he's pumping this out. He just wants a simple narrative against aid. But also, the amount of money that we've sent that he's citing is wrong. So there's so many different layers to how this guy messed up. And this is Lee Camp, okay? This isn't...
Space Ghost got a tier 1 subscription. I was going to cure cancer, but I decided to give my money to the CIA instead.
Thank you very much. Maybe I'll get a raise. I appreciate the tier 1. This is Lee Camp. This is somebody who's somewhat popular on the American left. And this is the type of nonsense that they're pumping out. But it wasn't just him. Cornell West, who's running for president, somebody that I thought I had respect for, was also speaking at this event. talking nonsense. Let's see if I can actually show you some of this. We can watch a little bit of it. I don't want to watch much of it. Again, I don't want brainworms, but we will watch some of it.
Let's please come to the... Lord. How you doing?
Also, I see on the wall, it says, "Where's Biden's peace plan?" I would love any of these guys to step out and say what their peace plan is. I would love, let me hear their peace plan. Let me hear them say, give the Russians all the land, give the colonists more land to colonize, push the natives off their land. I want to hear it. I want to hear them say it. I want to hear Cornell West say, push the natives off their land. I want to hear him say it.
Let me say that I am blessed to be here, but the crucial theme today is solidarity.
Now remember, Cornell West is going up on stage after two people talked who are former Russian state media hosts. No Ukrainians are even involved in the conversation about Ukraine and about the future of their country. This right here is an imperialist mindset. And I hate to call out all the people who made this event like this, but if you're making peace plans without the Ukrainians, that right there is the ultimate American-centric imperialist mindset, even if they don't see it that way.
In it together, we're focusing on the suffering of those friends who known called the wretched of the earth, and nothing is going to stop us, no matter how catastrophic the situation is, and no matter how dim and grim it looks. I want to begin by saluting my dear brother Eugene. I can see it's almost 20 years, brother. You strong as ever. You give it up for that brother. Love that brother. And that's Howard University, isn't it? Ooh, that's Stokely Carmichael, isn't it? That's Toni Morrison, isn't it? Lord, we ain't got to Donny Hathaway yet. Lord have mercy. And Roberta Flack. Sister Medea. Oh, Anahita and I have a profound respect and love for you. Longevity of integrity with levels of courage and unbelievable determination with that smile still on your lovely face. Give it up for our dear sister, Medea.
Okay, I do not care to watch them jerk each other off. Can we get to what he actually has to say?
That's the synecdochic imagination, a relation of parts and wholes. It's a relation of our present situation related to the past and the way in which pastness operates in the present, such that we can be able to take a stand to authorize a better, more visionary future that focuses on poor and working people. So I want to begin with an epigraph from the great W.B. Du Bois, the greatest public intellectual in the history of the American Empire. That he was there at the founding of the United Nations in San Francisco, and on the way back in June 27th, 1945, he wrote in the Chicago Defender, the leading black newspaper of the day,
"Abandon Ukraine. They should all be moved off their land." I remember when he said that. It was pretty controversial at the time.
June 27th, 1945, called The Winds of Time. He said, I envision, he almost says with tears in my eyes, I envision the emerging of a third world war with the American empire attempting to suppress Asia and stranglehold Russia.
Wow. Well, apparently, the Russians decided that they were going to place their neck into America's arms and yell, "Choke us! Choke us!" We didn't invade Russia. We didn't invade Belarus. We didn't invade anybody in their defensive alliance. They invaded Ukraine and then fell on the sword, and now it's our fault. Would any other country treat us like that? If we invaded Mexico tomorrow, and I hear some Republican politicians saying some crazy things about that. If we invaded Mexico tomorrow and it became a quagmire, do you think the rest of the world would be like, yeah, but Mexico really should have thought of America's security interests in the cartels? And, you know, at the end of the day, this is kind of Mexico's fault for not getting it under control. No, they wouldn't.
Why? In part, the legacy of the colonies.
Maybe the UK would. Rishi Sunak would. Probably Australia would.
And the truncated character of the United Nations. And he made his way all the way to New York. And he told his very good friend, Paul Robeson, that we have got to launch an anti-war movement. But that anti-war movement must be but a moment in an anti-imperialist project.
Wow, so, okay. The anti-imperialist project. So, okay, so I thought Cornell West was, oh God, I really don't want to say this because I used to have so much respect for this person. I thought Cornell West was smarter than to just be vaguely flower child anti-war. That just, war is bad because war, therefore all war, end it now, no matter the cost, no matter what you give up. I would think that he would be somebody who would value liberation and struggle against imperialism too much to boil his thinking down to that type of simplicity. The type of just, war's bad, end all wars. Don't think about the consequences of giving up and conceding all of your land for that. To an imperial invader, to a colonialist. So in order to fight against imperialism, we must stop sending weapons to the nation fighting against an imperialist invader. Look, honestly, I don't want to completely smash my image of Cornell West today. I don't even want to watch the rest of this. That's enough. That's enough of this. We have more to talk about the flower child left anyway. I want to show you the DSA International Committee because I am just taken today to rail on the left and I am going to enjoy it. Not really, it hurts, but I'm going to enjoy a little bit of it because I'm frustrated. The DSA has failed when it comes to dealing with the war in Ukraine. The left in general has failed when it comes to dealing with the war in Ukraine. It feels like the left generally, from how you listen to Code Pink, from how you listen to Dr. Cornell West, or how you listen to DSA, and when we talk about the American left, we're talking about the American socialist, the American communist, the American socialist communist left. I'm not talking about the Democratic Party. I'm not talking about social democrats. I'm talking about the communist and socialist left in the United States. While this is not true for all of them, and there are the Ukraine Solidarity Campaign, for example, which is a group of socialists that I think are principled on this issue and have released statements like this that are really good, that talks about the priorities of what happens when we end the war. For example, our points of unity are simple. Russia out of Ukraine, return to the pre-2014 borders, immediate withdrawal of Russian troops from Ukrainian territory. 2, the Ukraine Socialist Solidarity Campaign defends Ukraine's right to ask for, demand, and acquire all of the material and arms necessary for its defenses against Russia's criminal invasion. The United States and NATO should supply all the arms Ukraine requests with no strings attached. This means no U.S. and NATO commanders. This is even further than my position. No strings attached. That's further than my position. This means no U.S. and NATO commanders, no U.S. and NATO soldiers, no Lend-Lease agreements, and no legislative links to other military projects promoted in the U.S. Congress or by European governments. Number 3, cancel Ukraine's foreign debt. See, this is even further than I go. This is the type of radical socialist anti-imperialism I expected to see once the Russian troops crossed the border and all the people who were saying it wasn't going to happen were smacked in the face by reality. Instead, we got this Code Pink DSA nonsense. Here's what we got from the DSA International Committee. The war in Ukraine is and by the way, DSA stands for Democratic Socialists of America. I used to be a card-carrying member. Never went to any meetings, couldn't be bothered. I did cancel. They just weren't talking about issues that I was super invested in enough to keep renewing my membership. But I used to be a card-carrying member while I was canvassing for the Bernie campaign. The war in Ukraine is a disaster for working-class people in Ukraine, the region, and a terrible threat to us all, including increasing the danger of nuclear war and exacerbating global economic crises. We oppose the Russian invasion and call for the withdrawal of Russian troops to a settled ceasefire agreement. Now, they don't go into any details about what this agreement would be, because again, that's difficult. That would mean you'd have to think about, land back. Actually, that's an interesting thing. I would love to see someone ask Dr. Cornell West about the importance of land back, have him go on a 5 to 10 minute diatribe, and then ask him, so does that mean that you support giving Ukrainians all they need to get their land back? And then watch him unravel himself as he's trying to explain how it's totally different in this case, and never mind, actually that's stupid. Thank you so much, Lonerbox, for the raid. I appreciate it, Lonerbox or Bonerbox. Got him. Anyway, thank you for the 133. I'm getting very angry at the American left right now, so just stay tuned, okay? Thank you for all the raiders. Settled ceasefire agreement. We recognize that the expansion of NATO and the aggressive approach of Western nations have helped cause the crisis, and we demand an end to NATO expansion. Number one, if we get the ceasefire agreement, what outside of NATO could stop a Russian invasion of Ukraine from happening again? Because if you're dumb enough to think that the Russians are going to abide by their words and not invade again, then you didn't see Minsk 1, you didn't see Minsk 2, you didn't see Chechnya, and you didn't see the whole invasion. From when they started, they were saying it wasn't happening. 2014, they denied that they were even invading while they were invading Crimea. In 2022, they said it was a training exercise before they crossed the border and then invaded. Lied about it the whole time. So obviously, the Russians are not trustworthy on this. They cannot be trusted on this. So if NATO membership, which is the only thing that we know for sure is time-tested and proven to stop a Russian invasion, because we have kept Article 5 strong, because they know if they were to invade, they'd be fighting an unwinnable war. If that isn't what you're going to put in your ceasefire agreement, what are you going to put in your ceasefire agreement to stop the Russians invading again? Is it going to be kisses and hugs and promises, pats on the head? What is it going to be? Is it going to be a unilateral defense agreement where the United States says if Russia invades again, we will put troops on the ground and we'll fight them ourselves? I doubt Cornell West would ever say something so bold. It honestly would probably be safer to just put them in NATO and not just single us out. It also is, I'm going to be blunt, it's also a European security issue. So the Europeans should pull their weight too. So when they say an end to NATO expansion, what are they going to be putting in place instead of NATO to stop another Russian invasion, so you're not kicking the can down the road and quite literally abandoning Ukraine after we committed to help them defend their territorial integrity once they committed to give up their nuclear stockpiles, something that Ukrainians here regret very much. Also, I don't want to get into this conversation now, but the amount of Ukrainians that I've talked to that have said we should restart a nuclear weapons program because we only agreed to give up our nuclear weapons program under the condition that our territorial integrity was not threatened. There is a scenario where we don't help them, we abandon them, and the Ukrainians, they get more nationalistic. They come under the idea that, democracy failed us, liberalism failed us. These Western ideologies failed us. The Westerners failed us. Let's go our own way. And then they pursue their own nuclear weapons program. And you want to talk about the threat of nuclear war? That's something that would definitely be terrifying. Not for the Ukrainians. They'd feel more secure. But obviously having more states with regional conflict, I'm not going to call it a regional conflict, it's an invasion, but having more states that hate each other on their borders with nuclear weapons is not good. There's a reason we wanted them to give up their nuclear stockpile in the first place. But that's another topic for another day. We also oppose U.S. and NATO military interventionism and the tens of billions in military aid and weapon shipments, which only further exacerbates the war and undermines a negotiated settlement, as well as sanctions that will harm ordinary Russians. Number one, Russia is engaged in an illegal ethnic cleansing campaign and is trying to conquer Ukraine for colonial purposes to settle land, kick out the locals, and eradicate the Ukrainian national identity. That is something worth fighting against. That is something worth giving them the guns to push back against. Not everything can be saved with hugs and kisses, okay? Give Peace a Chance is a good song and everything, but the world isn't made up of John Lennons, okay? Not everybody values peace and love as much as you do. Russia has invaded 3 countries and have engaged in bombing campaigns and much more, in military interventions and much more, in Africa, in Syria, under a principle of not peace and love, but of military intervention. So if you're just walking in this with this kind of peace, love, flower child attitude, the Russians are going to roll your pockets and take Ukraine while you're not looking. 100%. No questions asked. Giving weapons for the struggle of liberation is worthwhile. 100%. 100%. Also, undermine a negotiated settlement. If the Ukrainians don't have leverage, and that includes military power, they will get less out of negotiations. If negotiations happen, and when they happen, they are going to need leverage to get the best deal possible. If we are saying right off the bat that we're not going to get militarily involved, then the Ukrainians are on their own. The people who agreed to defend their territorial integrity when they gave up the nuclear stockpiles have abandoned them once more, and the Russians are going to drain them for everything they have. And when that happens, the Ukrainians are going to look at that deal, they're going to say, fuck you, and then the war starts up again. This is not a comprehensive peace in Ukraine plan. This is not even something that they thought out. This is just reactionary, reactive, just John Lennon flower child nonsense. Also, the sanctions that will harm ordinary Russians. What sanctions does this refer to? They need to be more specific. Do they mean all sanctions? So, like, what about all the military components that are still getting in there? Or the civilian components for drones that are still getting into the country, which are then lobbed at Ukrainian cities, bombing men, women, and children? I don't believe that American capital should oil the gears of the Russian war machine, which is currently stomping its way across Ukraine. I think that's reasonable. But this is the type of statement that DSA puts out. And when their members, like Eric July, release statements that are contrary to this and try to say, hey, actually, maybe we support Ukraine, and then try to publish it with DSA, what do? They take it down. They remove it. They strip it. And they don't do it with like one of the people on their board voting for it or two of their people on their board voting for it. The entirety of their board voted unanimously to remove it. This isn't like a tiny DSA problem. This is a big, large-scale DSA problem. Anybody want to ask me why DSA membership is down? I have a few theories. I have one or two. Anyway, if you guys want to read the article I'm talking about, it's right here. I'll post it in chat. It's from Eric Lee. Decent article. I don't agree with everything in it, but now that it was, but then when it was sniped, I support it being read even more. Last one I want to show you guys. Here is the International Magazine, a popular socialist publication, posting about a Lenin statue being installed in occupied Kherson. Here's what they had to say about it. Lenin statue installed last year in Kherson, Ukraine. Russian soldiers installed this majestic statue. Oh, isn't it beautiful? Isn't settler colonialism and imperialism so beautiful? I mean, it's beautiful as long as you put a red star on it or a hammer and sickle. Then it's so pretty. This is the Marxist-Leninist viewpoint on the war in Ukraine. Is this it? This is it?
Immoral,
the view is
bankrupt.
Conquer Ukraine and put up your own statues in the ruins of their burnt out cities as a fuck you to them. To put the statues of the people who trampled upon the Ukrainian People's Republic, their democratically elected representatives, and their government and their sovereignty, put up the statues of those bastards who did that in their occupied land. And this is beautiful? This is just settler colonialism with a red star. This isn't anti-imperialism. This is disgusting. The socialist left has a problem. And the problem is sympathy for the Russian invasion, sympathy for colonialism, sympathy for imperialism, and for the ones who are not sympathetic, like the International Magazine, a rag publication full of dingbat cretin mouth breathers. When it's not them, then they're the other ones, like DSA, are weak on fascism, are weak on the imperialist invasion, are weak on colonialism, and they think all the world's problems can be solved with hugs and kisses and love and peace signs and just playing John Lennon's Imagine on loop. Bullshit. That's not the world. The world is a real place. It has violence, it has horrors, and it has man-made, disgusting creations beyond your wildest dreams. It's a terrible place. And sometimes, to protect yourself, violence is necessary. And people called the anarchists unrealistic, huh? God, we need to deal with the flower child left. Ugh.